call the member for Ballina.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I rise to continue my second read on this bill. And Mr Speaker, I would like to say at the outset of this second part that, of course, we know from the latest data that we are going to be facing some very tough decisions when it comes to protecting wildlife, because we know the climate scientists are telling us that we've locked in minimum three degrees of warming, and of course last year and the year before defied all predictions, and we're really in a time where we just don't know what we've already baked in. And so the clash between what we do need homes for people, we do need ecologically sustainable development, but what it's doing to our wildlife when we simply do not have that front and centre is devastating. And as I said in my speech previously, we're looking at about 10 million animals, species being affected each year. Mr Speaker, I do want to give a shout out to the Minister for Roads, and Minister for Regional Roads for meeting with me in the last week and engaging and in a really positive way. I have great respect for her. I think we came in here at the same time, and I'm confident that we can work together, in particular, without verballing her, but work together in particular to focus on the wildlife strikes, ways that the community can actually record that and give that data to Transport for New South Wales. Citizen science, if you like, even though it's a bit grim, but it would be very, very useful. And of course, to include wildlife strikes in speed zone reviews. So those are the two things that I look forward to working with Minister Aitchison on. Mr Speaker, in combination with habitat loss and a changing climate, the NRMA's Wildlife Road Safety Report 2022, I did refer to it as the 24 report, but it was actually 2022. I think that's right, Minister. It highlights that beyond vehicle damage, the societal costs across the system of all road incidents is about $7 billion a year. So this figure encompasses not just the financial costs, but what we want to put on the record today for the Greens is let's think about the impact that has, so on the species, obviously, on wildlife, but it's also tourism. And yesterday we saw the Premier, and it is a cause for celebration in my community that we have a burgeoning tourism industry. However, with such a low rate base, we really struggle to actually pay for the 2.5 million tourists a year. And it's a constant battle. And of course, we now have a 60-day cap on short-term rental accommodation, which I'm told is very successful. But I did mention yesterday to the Minister for the Environment and also the Minister for Roads, wouldn't it be amazing? I know we don't like, the old parties don't like taxes, but some sort of bed levy, a tourism levy, but you could call it an environmental levy. You could actually use that money to support conservation and environmental protection, as well as supporting, I guess, social infrastructure, greater social infrastructure in my region. So it impacts tourism, and it also impacts agriculture and, of course, as we say, ecosystems. So we cannot afford to remain complacent any longer when it comes to properly considering the impacts of our roadways on our native animals. And I know that, speaking to the Minister, and certainly my experience with Transport for New South Wales, and prior to that, the Roads and Maritime RMS, which I had a lot to do with because of the Pacific Highway upgrade, I know that they do take it seriously in terms of the impact on wildlife. However, what we don't see is a real understanding of those mitigation measures and whether they're successful or not. And it really does breed cynicism in the community. And I'll come to that in a moment. We know, Mr Speaker, that threats to our wildlife are accelerating. In the last 5 years, in my electorate alone, we've seen increasing and rolling disasters, including fires, floods, multiple floods, drought, and then the recent cyclonic event. These disasters absolutely had an impact on our wildlife, and I want to give a huge shout out to everyone in the Northern Rivers Wildlife Network, because I got calls on the Monday. I think the M1 opened again on the Monday, and as soon as people were able to, those wildlife carers, those incredible people in my community who are volunteers, were up and at it because they knew that the impact on wildlife was going to be significant from that storm event and the rain. And we see that every single time. Mr. Speaker, along with these climate-related disasters, we've also had a sharp increase in the number of wildlife deaths. So I keep saying that, but I really have to emphasise that it's on the... So whilst we face an extinction crisis on one hand, we are seeing an increase in wildlife strikes. It is not a good combination. And we know it is not mysterious, the connection between our developments and that impact. Mr. Speaker, I will come back to, in a moment, just mentioning some of the incredible organisations in my electorate that are doing everything they can to care for native wildlife injured on our roads. And I know that every single member in this place highly regards, I believe they highly regard all of their wildlife carers, including all the vets that volunteer their time to care for wildlife, because let's face it, it's not a profit. There's no profit in rescuing and rehabilitating wildlife. Mr. Speaker, the other thing I think that's important to put on the record is the trauma that happens not just to passers-by, the person who's hit a koala, for example, and that whole community around there. It's very traumatic, but it's also extremely traumatic for the wildlife carers and the vets all round. So that's another part of this, because this entire conservation effort is by volunteers, 90% volunteers. So to that end, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to give, Madam Speaker, my apologies, I'd like to give my deepest gratitude to the organisations and individuals who've taken the time to consult with my office and me about these amendments. Dr. Colin Salter from Wires was a wealth of information. The incredible teams at both the Northern Rivers Wildlife Hospital and the Byron Bay Wildlife Hospital, Annette McKinley on behalf of Conservation Ecologists Association, Claire Ulrichs, who's a registered carer for the Northern Rivers Wildlife Carers, Claire Ulrichs, who's also from Conservation Ecologists Association, Shaunti Keel, who's from the Northern Rivers Wildlife Carers, Bridget and Sophie Thompson, the Wildlife Twins. If you're ever up in my area, you really have to go and meet the Wildlife Twins. They're incredible. Anna Malloy from Gooningary Landcare, koala ecologist Caitlin Weatherstone, who's been advising me for over a decade now on all things ecology, Christine Lamerton from the New South Wales Parliamentary Library, thank you, and of course my colleagues in the other place, Kate Fairman and Sue Higginson, in their portfolios. Madam Speaker, I also want to recognise the work of Bangalore Koalas, Friends of the Koalas, World Wildlife Fund, the Nature Conservation Council, the Environmental Defenders Office, because they've all had a role to play in my region and continue to do so. And of course, it'd be remiss, anyone who is in the environmental space knows of koala whisperer Maria Mattis, and I hope the Minister Aitchison gets to meet Maria if she hasn't, because she's been doing decades of work. She literally, after the Black Summer bushfires, was out there. I managed to buy her a infrared camera, and she was out there rescuing koalas in a very, very grim scenario. Also, of course, the Northeast Forest Alliance and Dylan Pugh for their tireless work over many decades to protect wildlife habitat in our region. Madam Speaker, a report prepared by Ms Madison Meredith from Byron Bay Wildlife Hospital states, and I quote, that collisions with vehicles is the most common cause of injury across all species, and nearly 4 out of 5 wildlife patients hit by cars die or need to be euthanised. That's a grim statistic. The same report stated that driver behaviour is the single biggest contributor to motor vehicle accidents, and I think that's an area the Minister certainly can affect. So the focus needs to be placed on driver education, particularly on country roads, how to minimise, also protect yourself, but also minimise the risk of accidents involving wildlife. Collaborative solutions are key moving forward, and it's imperative that we take a collaborative approach. Madam Speaker, in determining which mitigate, we've seen mitigation measures in my region that simply haven't worked. There was millions spent, and a big shout out to all of the residents from Mission Vale who went through a terrible time, because who knew that the bypass of the Pacific Highway upgrade was going to go 3-4 kilometres inland. We still will probably never know what that was under the Nationals. Who knows what that was about? But it certainly had a huge impact on that beautiful little community in Mission Vale, in their lovely rainforest retreats, who now have the highway upgrade. We love the highway, but there's no world where it needed to go through that area. But I did see firsthand how the RMS tried very hard to mitigate what was going to be obvious harm to the Ballina koala population. There was millions and millions of dollars spent on fencing, and within a very short time what we saw was trees having fallen down on the fence, and of course no one had the money or the resources to maintain kilometres of fencing. It simply didn't work. So we look forward to working with the Minister, because there has to be ecologists. I do understand how it comes down to cost, and that's another conversation about compulsory acquisitions and sensitive receivers. That's a whole other kettle of fish. But we know that there's a paucity of funding available to mitigate, and so the best mitigation is not always on offer. And a lot of people from around the state wrote to us about their scenarios in the Appin Way, and I know there's been some AI solutions about that. I note the member for Campbelltown is here. I think it's in your electorate. And, where we have this tension between the best practice, the best model, the underpass, and what's actually on offer and financially possible. And I think that's, again, as I say, these are tough decisions that are going to be made. Madam Speaker, in conclusion, I'd like to leave the House with this thought. The measures we take today to ensure the best protection for wildlife on our roads in the face of a vast array of human-led challenges will help to ensure the longevity of our precious wildlife. This is about our future. This is about species on this planet, and we are literally the people in power that determine their fate. I urge you to support our bill.
I'm going to call someone to move that the debate be now adjourned.
Speaker.
I call a member for Campbelltown.
I move that this debate be now adjourned.
The question is that the debate be now adjourned. All of those opinion, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. And member for Ballina.
Madam Speaker, I ask that you fix the resumption of this debate as an order of the day for a future day.
I fix the resumption